Hey everyone, Johnny Skywatcher here, bringing you a new video titled Should You Watch? So in this video I'm going to tell you my initial thoughts and impressions about a new TV show or movie, and just tell you what I thought about it and tell you whether I think it is worth watching or not. So let's get to our first show, which is going to be Mrs. America. So what is Mrs. America? It is a new limited series from FX on Hulu. It started streaming this last Wednesday on April 15th. So far, the first 3 episodes are available, and there's going to be a further 6 episodes, which are going to be released weekly on Wednesdays. The show is based on a true story about the Equal Rights Amendment and the fight to ratify it, and then also the unexpected opposition which was led against it by the main character, Phyllis Schlafly, who is played by Cate Blanchett. So what is the show so far? So far, I've only seen the first 3 episodes. Right away, the show throws you into 1971, and it doesn't really give you any history lessons. So if you're like me, you're not familiar with the ERA, you're not going to get much help from the show. The first episode focuses mostly on Phyllis, and that is going to be a thing throughout the show, even when the episodes are kind of titled by characters. But it seems like the first episode is basically all Phyllis for the most part until like the very end, and then moving on, each episode has a different character that half the storyline focuses on, and then the other half is Phyllis. In general, it seems like the show is very character oriented. It doesn't like give you a lot of necessarily the historical context for everything going on. It's just a character study that happens to be in this circumstances. So, and sometimes it kind of feels like it's a I almost want to say homework show, in that this show doesn't give you a lot of background information. And if you don't know, like me, if you don't know that much about the ERA, you weren't alive back then, the show isn't going to give you that information. I feel like the show tries to be more of a character study, so that you shouldn't have to know everything, but sometimes it feels like you're missing out on stuff by not knowing. And sometimes it can feel, I feel a little lost just watching it, because like I don't really understand quite everything that's going on. It definitely feels like from the storytelling perspective, they're telling a story about characters first and history is second. So the characters so far, like I mentioned, episode 1 is mostly on Phyllis. Episode 2 puts more focus on Gloria Steinem, who's played by Rose Byrne, who in the trailers, I felt like they kind of made her character out to be the antagonist to Phyllis, as in we were going to see a story about like basically these 2 characters going against each other. And at least in episodes 2 and 3, it really does feel more like they're not even going up against each other or even talking to each other that much. It's just they happen to be, Gloria Steinem happens to be on the other side, but she's not even the main person. There's like several other characters that are also pretty important. And then in episode 3, introduces, well, it doesn't really introduce because she was introduced earlier, but it starts focusing heavily on this character who's a presidential candidate, Shirley Chisholm, who's played by Uzo Aduba. And so when they introduce her, that feels like another thing that doesn't really feel like it's quite part of this main conflict. It's definitely not a conflict in terms of like characters conflicting with each other. Most of the scenes are Phyllis having scenes with the different people with the ERA, and then Gloria having scenes with the people, the women liberation, and then episode 3 starts throwing in political scenes with Shirley, and that are sometimes involved with the women's liberation, but kind of breaks out into what it feels like a third sort of part of the story, and we'll have to see if that keeps evolving. But it kind of feels like a little imbalanced. It feels like in the show, if Phyllis wasn't played by a named actress like Cate Blanchett, this would be more of an ensemble show. But it feels like probably the moment they cast her and they brought her on the show, that they kind of molded the show around her. But to the point where I feel like you can see the backbones of what used to be an ensemble show. I think the initial pitch for this show definitely seems like it's centered around Phyllis in the trailers. But when you're actually watching this show, it doesn't necessarily feel like it's centered just around Phyllis. It feels like it's showing all these different viewpoints. So it kind of seems like from the initial backbone to the show, from the writing perspective, was more on a ensemble show, and that when they cast Cate Blanchett, or in order to get the show made, they had to focus more on this other angle of it. But that all of that characters ensemble stuff is still there in the background. So what did I think of Mrs. America? To be honest, I'm not sure how much I liked it. Cate Blanchett is definitely interesting to watch as that character. So at times it's sort of going in the direction of House Cards, and the idea that I don't really like this character. I don't like the decisions she's making, but she's interesting to watch, and it's interesting to watch as she sort of maneuvers politically, and it sort of makes those decisions. But at the same time, she's much more sympathetic of a character than someone like Frank Underwood, who's just garbage. She seems to have more reasons to why she's doing what she's doing, and part of that might be the show itself. I don't know how historically accurate it is. It's interesting to see. At times, I do feel like the show is trying a little too hard to say, like, there's two sides to conflict, but there's both sides are good, right? We'll have to see if that how that plays out for like the length of the show. But at least right now, from what I've seen in the episodes and what I saw the trailers, it seems like the show doesn't know whether or not it supports the ERA, and it seems like they're trying to be unbiased and show both sides, when I think you could make it, I prefer if it made a stance one way or the other. Well, definitely I'd prefer one way, but it doesn't really seem like the show is going to do that, because it's more focused on being a character study, and ultimately the history of it kind of feels like a backdrop. Like, it's not as integral when you focus too much on the character study aspect of it. So, should you watch it? My suggestion is, if you're going to watch it, watch the first episode. If you're like me and you're not familiar with the history of it, if you have if you find yourself confused at all, or if you just really interested, well, that's interesting, I want to know more about it, like the Equal Rights Amendment. Before watching the second episode, go look that up. Go look up anything you have any questions about, even if it's just, a quick Wikipedia search. I think that would have helped me if I had done that the first time. And just look up some info about the characters and who the real life people were. And I think that kind of provides some more background that this show really doesn't go into. It doesn't hold your hand at all. And whether that's a good thing or not is, I guess, debatable. But yeah, that would be my suggestion if you're going to watch it. Should you watch it? Yeah, I think if you're interested, I would recommend this. If you're interested in character dramas, this is definitely a character first show. If you like, especially historical dramas, it's heavy in the gender politics, so you need to be open to that. I'm not going to say it's that's what the show is about. So if that kind of thing turns you off, this show is not going to be for you. So you need to be open to, stories about women. I don't, yeah, that I'm not going to say any more about that, but obviously if you're not into that kind of story, or you're easily offended by that kind of story, I don't know why you would be, but then you're not going to like this show. Also, it's got a dash of political drama in there. Maybe not as much as West Wing, and sometimes in the scenes, the political scenes, it kind of lost me. Like, it's just them saying delegates this, delegates that, and then they, especially it's episode 2, it's just a lot of talk about delegates, and it doesn't really feel grounded. It's just the characters saying political stuff, and then another character saying political, and political. And it doesn't really feel grounded in the character motivation. So it feels like you have all this interesting character stuff going on, especially with the character of Phyllis in episode 1. And then you get these just characters in these scenes where they're just blah. It almost gets to, it's not quite as bad as like, say, technobabble in a show like Star Trek, but it starts getting to there where, like, it doesn't feel like the characters are motivated by anything to say the things they're saying. They're just saying it because it's in the script. And this is the part where they talk about politics, but they're not actually talking about politics. They're talking about numbers. Yeah, it starts to become, I would say, more of a statistics thing, especially you're talking about the number of delegates in this state and who's going to be in charge of leading the opposition in that state. And it's just numbers, and it's just statistics, and it's not that interesting to watch. But I will say, rewatching it after I looked up some information about it has been more interesting, especially episode 1. I'll have to see if that kind of continues through episodes 2 and 3. But it's interesting on 2 levels. I would say rewatching it, like having like looked up the information, you have the level of just being more familiar with the characters, but then also you have the level of where you have more context. Like, there's a specific scene in rewatching the first episode where Phyllis asked this congressperson, "Did you read what section 2 of the ERA?" And the guy's like, "Well, I don't. Of course I read it." And then she's like, "Did you read it? Because it says this." And if you actually read the Equal Rights Amendment, it's like three lines. No, not three, like 3 sentences. It's not very long. It's very short. So the idea that this guy hasn't read it because he's just a politician, he doesn't care. It's different once you know what the ERA is, because not knowing, I kind of assume of, like, when you ask a politician, "Did you actually read this?" I'm thinking of this like long bill and like all these different things, and it's like, oh, then it is somewhat more impressive that you know that there's a section 2 and that you actually know what it says. Because, I'm imagining this like long bill with saying all these things, and no, you can look up online. It's just like it's 3 sentences. It's not very long. It's not very complicated, and yeah, so that kind of changes your perception of that scene. And I don't know, to a certain point, it seems like I don't know if that's the scene is as good as the first time I watched it not knowing, because it makes it seem like she's more knowledgeable than she really is. Like, yeah, like rewatching it, yeah, you read the section 2, but like it's a sentence. So those were my thoughts on Mrs. America. Let me know if you like the show or not, or like let me know if you decide to watch it based on this or not. Feel free to comment and like the video by clicking that like button. And please let me know if you like the concept of this video, of the should you watch. Is this something that you think works? Do you have any other shows that you would like to see me cover on this? And I guess I'll see you in the next video. Bye.